Go ahead.
Okay. Welcome to day one. Namaste and greetings. I, Varushka Bhushan, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. The International Day of Women in Diplomacy, observed annually on June 24th and declared by the UNGA's 76th session, celebrates the significant contributions of women to diplomacy. This day honors women diplomats for their achievements and resilience while advocating for gender equality within the diplomatic sphere. Despite 16 countries adopting or committing to feminist foreign policies since 2014, true feminist principles have often been diluted in practice. On this occasion of the International Day of Women in Diplomacy, IMPRI and the Asia Foundation, with their steadfast dedication to advocacy, education, and youth empowerment, proudly announce the launch of the Feminist Foreign Policy, Past, Present, and Future, an online international summer school program, a 3-day immersive online certificate training symposium to be held between the 24th and the 26th of June. This pioneering 3-day immersive symposium is designed to immerse the next generation of leaders in the intricate world of diplomacy and gender equality. We welcome you and thank you all for joining this journey for mutual learning. The chair for this program is Professor Vibhuti Patel, visiting distinguished professor at IMPRI, and our expert panel for the program includes Ms. Stephenie Foster, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, Ambassador Latha Reddy, Ms. Nandita Baruah, Dr. Shweta Singh, Professor Anuradha M. Chinoy, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, and Ambassador Riva Ganguly Das. With our governors, Ms. Nandita Baruah, Ms. Apurva Singh, Dr. Arjun Kumar, and Dr. Simi Mehta, alongside our coordinators, Mr. Satyam Tripathi, Ms. Vitita Jha, and Ms. Shweta Shankar Pidimari. Proceeding further, we welcome everyone to this transformative journey and appreciate your dedication in investing your time, energy, and commitment to gaining a profound understanding of the crucial role and intricate details of policy and feminism. We will also share reference outlines and readings for your resources in your email for your perusal. And before we start today's session, I would like to state some housekeeping announcements. Please join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after every presentation. Share your questions in the Q&A box or by raising your hand and you will be called upon. The questions should not be posted as an anonymous attendee and ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments to save time. To start, we have a small presentation on the International Day of Women in Diplomacy.
Reed, please unmute.
Satyam unmute.
Of women in diplomacy. This day promotes increased representation of women in key decision-making roles, which is crucial for advancing multinational agendas and achieving sustainable development. Good afternoon, everyone. Of the International Day of Women in Diplomacy, Impact and Policy Research Institute, in collaboration with Asia Foundation, is excited to announce a 3-day symposium on feminist foreign policy, past in 2024, it is going to be the International Day for Women. This day, more cities have representation of women The objectives of this day are to celebrate women's contributions to the is awareness of the challenge, advocate for gender equality, and inspire because you are both marketing
The General Assembly declaring June 24th onward, the International Day of Women in Diplomacy.
That the Assembly wishes to adopt the resolution on the International Day of Women in Diplomacy. It is so decided.
So excited about this, and I welcome and applaud the leadership of the Maldives and the core group of countries, amazing women, El Salvador, Eritrea, Grenada, Guyana, Kenya, Latvia, Lebanon, Maldives, Malta, Qatar, St. Lucia, South Africa. Congratulations into labelling this resolution and in the co-sponsors for its really broad cross-regional support. I encourage all to see this day as an annual opportunity to reflect on the successes of women who have paved the way and to commit the United Nations to promote the cause of women diplomats.
Ran into some technical difficulties there. We're sorry. Try to redo
We
that.
can share the video with everybody.
Yes,
Yeah.
we will.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you so much. And before we start, I would like to start with some welcoming remarks, starting with Dr. Simi Mehta ji, CEO and Editorial Director at IMPRI.
Thank you very much, Varushka. And happy International Day of Women in Diplomacy to one and all present here. Today, the 24th of June marks a very important day in the global effort towards equity and equality. On behalf of IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, I extend my gratitude to the Asia Foundation, led by Ms. Nandita Baruah, for having supported us in advocating this endeavor. I am grateful to Professor Vibhuti Patel for chairing this session and all the expert panelists. We really look forward to having an enriching 3-day course journey, and I welcome you all. I will not waste much time, and I hand it over to Varushka for the next session. Thank you very much.
Before we proceed, Ms. Professor Patel, I think you need to mute your audio, please.
There is some disturbance from.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Simi. I would also like to invite Ms. Nandita Baruah ji, the country representative for the Asia Foundation in India, for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Varushka. First and foremost, greetings to everybody on this very important day of, women in foreign policy and for women diplomats. I think days like this become a landmark and sometimes the right time to initiate conversations on issues that are forward-looking and that are actually looking to position countries such as us in India and other countries in Asia at the center of some critical debate. So I'm really thankful that IMPRI has taken up this initiative, and to Dr. Simi and Dr. Arjun, that you've taken up this process of really taking forward this conversation on feminist foreign policy to a much wider audience and garnering basically a larger discourse and a larger perspective on what does it mean when we talk about the issue of feminist foreign policy. I think we've had many discussions over the past, at least I could say the 3 years or so in India itself on this issue. IMPRI has been at the center of it, so have organizations like Kubanine and others, and CSR. And I think from all of this, what has come out is that there is really a bigger need to come to a understanding of what really the concept of feminist foreign policy is when it comes to countries which are developing, when it comes to countries which are trying to play a critical role in the larger global geopolitics and strategy. Therefore, I think I'm really happy that we are able to partner in India with IMPRI to start this debate off from here. You have major stalwarts who are going to be addressing the participants on this. Ambassador Trigunar, Ambassador Reba Ganguly, Dr. Sanjukta, uh, Professor Vibhuti Patel, Dr. Chinoy, not to mention, of course, Simi herself, who's done a lot of work on this. So I think this is going to be a very enriching conversation. And what I'm hoping is that we get to hear more from those who are participating about what could be some of the ways in which countries in the global south can really enrich this debate and make this concept of feminist foreign policy a much more southern owned framework, right? Something which we don't say, well, it's very easy to dismiss ideas by saying this doesn't apply to the global south, it's a global north thing. Well, it isn't, because a lot of global south countries have adopted it and they've made it their own. And I think we at TAF are looking at making this our regional own conversation and taking it beyond, just the framing that has come out of the north. And I think when we say feminist foreign policy, I just want to end with one thing. We're really looking at a much more inclusive approach. And I think sometimes the fear of the word feminist that comes to people's head is something we need to demystify. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Dr. Stephenie Foster on her work, because she's done a lot on this to really bring about the inclusive issue, the points of addressing more marginalization through our policies, and being cognizant of the impacts that we have in our foreign policy issues across the globe. So I think this is a great opportunity for all of us to put our heads together, and I look forward to listening to all of you. And again, congratulations, IMPRI, for putting this together, and really want to thank the participants who have joined this conversation today. Thank you so much, Varushka.
Thank you so much. And to conclude our opening remarks, I would like to welcome the chair for this program, Professor Vibhuti Patel, who is a visiting distinguished professor at IMPRI. Ma'am, you're muted still.
Thank you, Varushka, for introducing the program, and I congratulate Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi, Mehta, and Ms. Nandita Baruah from the Asia Foundation for organizing this 3-day international online symposium on the occasion of International Day of Women in Diplomacy, and also welcome today's panelists, Ms. Stephenie Foster, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, Ambassador Latha, Reddy, and Ms. Nandita Baruah, who are going to make presentation, and esteemed participants. There was an excellent response. Over 2,000 people registered for the program, but I think the method of getting into Zoom is a bit different from usual IMPRI, this thing, where there is a direct connectivity. So I think many complaints I am receiving on my WhatsApp, but still more than 500 people have been able to join, which is really a very, very encouraging and inspiring. The International Day of Women in Diplomacy, which is observed, I think we need to first of all offer our tribute to Dr. Hansa Mehta, who served as Indian delegate to the UN Commission on Human Rights in between 1947 to 1948, and the way she ensured more gender-sensitive language in the landmark Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR, and also so many women ambassadors, right from Vijayalakshmi Pandit to many freedom fighters who were always thinking globally and acting locally way back in the 50s. What we saw was a resurgence of interest, and the term feminist foreign policy became more popular. Only its genesis lay in the 1975 International Declaration by the UN of International Women's Year, and the decade of 1975 to 85, which was declared as a women's decade, which opened the avenues for more and more regional and global dialogues, where which emerged in so many international covenants, such as Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination 1978, Nairobi Forward-Looking Strategy 1984, International Covenant on Population and Development 1994, and we saw that tremendous transnational solidarity that emerged during that decade also resulted in germination of idea of feminist foreign policy, because we can make changes if this whole women also start becoming more vocal for the global issues, for the national level and the macro issues. So feminist foreign policy began with the peacekeeping, peace building and peace making initiatives, because that was the time where nearly at 200 spots on this planet conflicts were going on. Currently official data says that there are 43 places on this planet where these wars are going on. Feminism always believes in personal is political. So when you talk about the world's peace, and that was the slogan in 1975, our answer to that, and we retorted back by saying peace begins from home. So fight against sexual and sexist violence, promotion of education for women and girls, the kind of work which Malala is doing, or even men and boys who are from the intersectionally vulnerable sections, and ensure economic emancipation of women across the world, and endorse women's leadership in politics, diplomacy, decision making. All apex bodies of decision making are extremely important. Women's role in peace negotiation and treaties, and also in the post-pandemic world, what we had was a Generation Equality Forum 2021, in which women from leaders from 65 countries came together. And I think with this optimistic note that we can make change, another world is possible, gender just world is possible, peaceful world is possible, gender inclusive world is possible. I think with this optimistic note, I would like to welcome all of you. Thank you.
Mom, I will once again ask you to mute your audio. We're getting a but thank you all for your opening remarks, and I'm very excited to delve into our very first session. And I'm delighted to invite Ms. Stephenie Foster, partner at Smash Strategies, co-author of Feminist Foreign Policy in Theory and Practice, for her inaugural session to discuss the International Day of Women in Diplomacy. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you for speaking with us.
Yes, well, good morning from me, because it's morning where I am. And I'm very honored to be here and to talk with all of you, because I think this is such a critical topic as we focus, and you all have focused on looking at the past, present, and future of feminist foreign policy. The reason this topic has gained such momentum around the globe, again, with practitioners, academics, activists, and really the general public in some ways, is because as we look out across the globe, we see that there are obviously many, many conflicts and foreign policy dilemmas, and the institutions and theories that we've been operating under in the sort of post-World War II era are, not really responding to the issues of the day in a way that reflects, I think, the modern reality of how we look at the world. And so feminist foreign policy has emerged over the last 10 years. And that is a really exciting development. And I really appreciated the opening remarks saying how this needs to be now looked at in the context of this region or other regions around the world that can really take this concept and make it their own. So I'm going to do a few things today, talk about how we got here to feminist foreign policy, talk about the countries that have a feminist foreign policy, trade policy, or development policy, and then highlight some issues for the future, and obviously have some time for questions. I do want to start also by thanking the Asia Foundation and IMPRI in particular for pulling this together. And for really, I think, the thoughtful concept of doing this on the International Day of Women in Diplomacy. Because I will say one thing that I found is when people ask me, what is feminist foreign policy, which is a very common question, and we'll talk about what we've seen that it is. Often, if people have an idea of what feminist foreign policy is, they think about it in terms of increasing the number of women in diplomacy, in national security, in the professions that really implement these issues. But as I like to say, not every woman is a feminist, and not every feminist is a woman. So the critical nature of this conversation is really to help us understand how to go from increasing the number of women in these critical positions, which is fundamental, and foundational to feminist foreign policy, but to a policy that's more transformational. Because feminist foreign policy is not just about sort of adding women to the mix, to the current structures that we have, but rethinking them in a way that helps us, again, transform these institutions that we all are operating in, and also transform the policies of countries as they interact with the outside, with outside actors, i.e. everyone else but people in their own country. So this is a great time to rethink all of these policies, and a really wonderful time to have this conversation. I want to start by saying, and maybe we can go to the next slide. I mean, one of the reasons that my co-author, Susan Markham, and I wrote this book was because we were asked to, but really is because there was no real baseline out there of trying to grapple with all the different ways that people are understanding these three words, right? Feminist foreign policy. The first time on the international stage that these three concepts came together in terms of establishing a feminist foreign policy was 10 years ago in 2014, when Margot Wallström, the then foreign minister of Sweden, announced that Sweden would have a feminist foreign policy. Sweden was the first country, and it has been, for 8 years, it had a feminist foreign policy. Spoiler alert, it did, rescind its feminist foreign policy when a new government came in 2022. But really, it did develop a lot of these critical concepts that countries around the world are using. And feminist foreign policy really, again, as Sweden looked at it, was a way to kind of increase representation and think about foreign policy in a more gender-focused way. I think the critical thing as we have this conversation is that this has been an evolving set of concepts. Sweden started the conversation, but with not a fully developed, I think, concept of what a feminist foreign policy would be. And that has evolved over time, especially as more countries have developed either a feminist foreign policy, a feminist development policy, or a feminist trade policy. Some countries have two of the three. Some countries almost have three. Some countries just say they have a feminist foreign policy. But it's really critical to understand that there's no one definition. This is really frustrating to people. It's probably frustrating to you who are listening. It's somewhat frustrating to all of us who deal with this set of issues. The important thing to conceptualize, though, is that as we think about feminist foreign policies, it is important to place them in the context in which each country is operating. And as we'll see in this conversation, and I'll talk a little bit about it more, each country that has developed these policies has done it slightly differently. But we see across the 16 countries right now that, again, either have a feminist foreign, trade, or development policy, that they tend to have four fundamental things in common. Again, each country is different. Each country comes to this with its own place in the global kind of hierarchy and order, and the regions are different, and each country is dealing with a different history of their foreign policy and how they view gender equality and feminism. But as we saw across these countries, there are four things that a feminist foreign policy tends to have. And I'm going to talk about them right now. They're on the slide. And by the way, I assume we can share these slides, so please feel free. If you don't want to take notes, you can, I think, take the slides. But the first is that gender equality is both a goal of foreign policy and a strategy. As we saw in the video, and I'm sure most of you know because you work on these issues and you study them, when countries are, the more gender equal countries are, the better their outcomes are, both domestically in terms of stability and security and women having more choices in their lives and the ability to control their lives, but also countries that are more gender equal tend to be engaged less in conflict. They tend to be countries that don't start conflict as readily. They tend to be countries that engage in the international community more. They tend to be, people countries that sign more treaties. They're leaders in trying to really shape the policies that bring us to a more prosperous, safer, and more secure world. They tend to address issues like climate change more, and all the panoply of issues that we as a globe are really grappling with right now. So the first thing is that gender equality is a goal of the foreign policy, but it's also seen as a strategy to, in fact, lead to better outcomes that are better for foreign policy and developing national security outcomes that lead to a more, safer, secure, and prosperous world. The second thing, which is very critical to feminist foreign policies around the world, is a broadened definition of security. We, especially I would say in the United States, but I think globally, often think of security in a very militarized way. Security is what we think about armed forces or police forces, kind of ensuring that we're safe. But what feminist foreign policy really does is broaden that definition of security, so that we're looking at things like the impact of food insecurity, the impact of climate insecurity, the impact of global pandemics, the impact of large migrations of refugees, understanding that not just militarization, conflict, and dealing with how to address those issues in the more traditional national security and foreign policy means, but looking at all of the newer they're not newer issues, but a newer sort of realization that these issues do affect all of us. I think COVID brought that to light, if nothing else, but we see that across the globe, and certainly the UN and the human security work at the UN has also brought this to the fore. But this broadened definition of security is very critical to feminist foreign policies, understanding that we don't just think about security, again, in terms of conflict and addressing this in a militarized manner. The third is the elevation of diverse voices. And that really takes two different sort of approaches. One is this idea that we're talking about on the Day of International Women in Diplomacy, that there need to be more diverse voices, not just women, but a more diverse set of voices at the top levels of foreign policy and national security decision-making across the globe. And again, this goes to, whether it's women in the armed forces leadership, women in diplomatic leadership, women in trade leadership, just the elevation of diverse voices in this very critical set of institutions that, like them or not, really do drive what we do in national security and foreign policy. But the other interesting thing that these countries have in common when they talk about elevating diverse voices is the idea that countries and foreign policy professionals should reach out and really listen to civil society in the countries in which they are working, so that those voices, those diverse voices, the voices of people who are impacted by foreign policy and national security decision-making, can have some input into the work that's being done and that really impacts them. So this is, I think, one of the most critical and in some ways radical concepts of feminist foreign policy, that it's not just the people who go to school to do, foreign policy or go to national institutes, big universities, and become part of the foreign service. It's not just those people who should have an impact on foreign policy, but the voices of those who are actually seeing what those foreign policy decisions mean to them on a daily basis. And the fourth thing is, I think, also very radical, kind of hard to, in some ways, grapple with, but this idea that foreign policy should address historic power imbalances. We think about that in terms of how money gets spent, right? How countries spend their resources. And I think we all know that when you look at how money gets spent, you get a very good sense of people's priorities. And certainly the idea is in a feminist foreign policy to really look at how to more right-size spending on defense and the military versus diplomacy and development, because those those things they're all important, but countries do tend to right now spend more on defense than they do on diplomacy and development. It's certainly true here in the United States, and it is true in many, many countries across the globe. And again, this brings in this issue of addressing how to listen to those who are impacted by our foreign policy. And in some cases, in feminist foreign policy, really looking to address systemic issues, such as the impact of patriarchy, colonialism, racism. Those issues, I think, are the most challenging because there's a spectrum of views about what feminist foreign policy really is, from people who are much more focused on changing institutions and are institutionalists to really rethinking whether we need these institutions in the manner in which they are constructed today. Full and fair disclosure, and I'm an institutionalist. I worked at the US State Department. I'm somebody who really has grappled with this in terms of, in the US, for example, what we can do to really ensure that we transform the State Department, the Defense Department, USAID. But my co-author, I would say, is more somebody who thinks about how, are these institutions still kind of right-sized and right for the day, these issues of the day. So there's a spectrum of thought about feminist foreign policy. And I will say this, to pinpoint this, and I think maybe this will come up in the questions, civil society certainly has a different view of what feminist foreign policy is than governments do. Civil society tends, of course, to push us harder and really get people engaged and asking more kind of systemic questions about what a feminist foreign policy really means. Is it, or should it be more than just this idea that you add women to the mix, or you add feminists to the mix and sort of stir, right? Add women and stir. Is that enough? And I think most people would say no, but how far you take that is very critical to this concept of feminist foreign policy. So next slide. Yes, I think this now goes to this question of the past. How did we get here? What are the concepts that have brought us to feminist foreign policy? In a lot of ways, as we were writing the book, we spent a lot of time thinking about this, because in some kind of conversations, people seem a little stunned that there's something, called feminist foreign policy, or that these concepts have come together. But really, when you look at across, really hundreds of years, but even the last 100 years, feminist foreign policy has arisen from so much work that's been done by civil society, by activists, both within and within governments, in terms of what international institutions like the UN have done, and country governments, but really civil society, women's rights movements and organizations across the globe, human rights movements across the globe. And these concepts have really come together, building on the early concepts of human rights in the UN founding documents, and even before that, of course, women's rights and peace movements. And also, obviously, this concept of it's not just about women's rights, but it's about transformational change. And so these are some of the key concepts. One of the most important, which I think is the next slide, has been the movement for women, peace, and security. Actually, let's go to the next, and we'll come back to countries with a feminist foreign policy in a minute, because I think I put these slides out of order a bit. So as I think most of you know, the UN Security Council passed the original Women, Peace, and Security resolution and framework in 2000. And this has been really transformational in a lot of ways, and in some ways not transformational enough. This is, again, a set of 10 resolutions really focusing on the critical need of women to be engaged in conflict resolution, conflict prevention, and conflict mediation. This is, again, similar to feminist foreign policy. Often people say, oh, WPS, as we call it, is a sort of Western global North concept, and how is it really relevant? And really, that's not true, because most of the groundswell for the Women, Peace, and Security resolutions came from the global South. And in fact, Namibia was the country that put forward the original 1325 resolution. So this really focuses on women in peace and conflict, which is a critical foundation to feminist foreign policy. But importantly as well, it's not the entire framework, because foreign policy is, again, more than peace and security, more than conflict resolution. It really tries to bring in issues of development and trade in a more pointed way. Some people argue that, women, peace, and security is enough, this framework. We don't need a feminist foreign policy. We just need to implement these resolutions. And I mean, that's an argument. There are criticisms, as I note, that 1325 and the 9 successor resolutions reinforce gender norms of women as victims, or women as inherently peaceful or inherently peacemakers, which I personally don't agree with, and disproportionately focuses on women in the security sector, right? Women who are in peacekeeping missions or women who are in the military. So that's a criticism, and that is something that people have raised. But very important for us as we embark on these conversations about feminist foreign policy to recognize the tremendous contributions of the women, peace, and security framework and agenda to the work being done on feminist foreign policy. Just sort of as an aside, as we were working on this book, actually a precursor to it, Susan and I had written a couple of white papers. We did a survey of actors, in the U.S., in the sort of U.S. context, who was working on in civil society, who was working on feminist foreign policy, and who was working on women, peace, and security. And we assumed that these would be the same people, and we were wrong. Never assume anything. As we did this mapping exercise, we found that in the Venn diagram, right, of feminist foreign policy and women, peace, and security, there were very, very few people who were working on both. We were 2 of them. There weren't more than 10 more in our mapping. Not that this was a comprehensive mapping, but it was an interesting point in time. This was maybe 5 years ago, where we saw very, very little overlap. There's more now, but it's an interesting tension between practitioners who really focus on women, peace, and security, and those who focus on feminist foreign policy. All right, so that's sort of the past. I'm going to go to the present, which you can go back 1 slide. Sweden, as I said, was the first country to adopt a feminist foreign policy in 2014, 10 years ago. They did rescind their feminist foreign policy in 2022 when a new government came in. I feel compelled to point this out all the time. Feminist foreign policy is inherently political. It inherently challenges the power structure, and it's also often tied to very, to critical leaders, to political party platforms, to what a party chooses to prioritize when it comes to office. Sweden is a great example of that. When the new, more conservative party came into power in Sweden in 2022, its first 2 foreign policy announcements were, number 1, that it would support Ukraine in the conflict with Russia, and put more resources towards arming Ukrainians. And secondly, it would rescind its feminist foreign policy. Interestingly, saying one thing that I think Ambassador Reddy said, I believe, which was that the word feminist was, off-putting to many people, and also that, it was a concept that the current government of Sweden was not sure that it wanted to use as a construct. It did say Sweden would continue to be a country that focused on gender equality and was committed to gender equality, but did not have a feminist foreign policy. There's a lot in there that's very interesting we can talk about later. As of early 2023, when we wrote the book, was mid-2023, at least 10 other countries at that point had adopted a feminist foreign policy. We're now up to 16. As you can see, the countries have the wave of feminist foreign policy has moved from Northern Europe, Sweden, Norway, kind of over Canada, and then into Europe, and now into, I think, interestingly, Mexico, Chile, Colombia. We'll talk about Colombia in a little bit because they have an interesting take on feminist foreign policy. Mongolia. And we see that countries are continuing to join the list. Also, subnational governments, Scotland, which is obviously not a country, has a feminist foreign policy, as does Catalonia, the Basque region of Spain has a feminist foreign policy. And just as something to look at in the upcoming UK elections, the Labour Party has committed to a feminist foreign policy in its policy platforms in this election. So if the Labour Party indeed wins in the UK, it will be very interesting to see what the UK does to try to implement a feminist foreign policy. So with that, I think just we could go on to the next 2 slides. Okay, so critical as we talk about this, I just want to highlight a few things, and then I'm going to just move to the future and stop for questions. As we found out, I think it's very important to continue to think about the need for political will and leadership commitment in countries with a feminist foreign policy. Obviously, Sweden is a great example of leadership commitment going away. But this is also true when we think about who leads our foreign policy institutions. I'm a firm believer that personnel is policy. It matters who are in the jobs at the very top level, but really at every level, so that we're ensuring that there's really political will to continue these conversations. It's easier to say you have a feminist foreign policy than to actually implement one. Critical also is to be committed to structural and institutional change, increasing the representation of women and other underrepresented groups across government, and making sure you're willing to spend money. Because again, as we discussed before, how you spend money really reflects your priorities. So where do we go for the future? And I would say, by the way, I see a question that just popped up. I can't read all the questions, but I will say the United States does not have a feminist foreign policy. I'm going to talk about the US briefly in a minute. So if we go to the next slide, I can do that as part of the next conversation. So here's the future. By the way, you all are the future of feminist foreign policy, every single one of you on this webinar, and every single one of you who are listening or thinking about this, because really it's up to everybody who cares about this to help shape feminist foreign policy in the place where they are. So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of concept, but a few things to highlight. There, as I said, new countries announcing support for feminist foreign policy in the last year or so. Colombia is very interesting because often as we go and talk about our book and talk about feminist foreign policy a lot, people will say, oh, so feminist foreign policy is pacifist. And that isn't necessarily true. And in fact, Colombia is the only country that has a feminist foreign policy that has made an explicit commitment to a pacifist approach to feminist foreign policy. Interesting given their history, interesting given everything that's gone on in that country with conflict and having a war with non-state actors, with the FARC, et cetera. It's the only country. And I think this, again, gets to the tension between what is feminist foreign policy. Some people, particularly civil society, would say that feminist foreign policy must be pacifist, whereas obviously most governments, with the exception of Colombia, that have one, don't take that approach. Many, countries that have a feminist foreign policy, many of them are fairly large arms exporters. That is part and parcel of, their foreign policy in a way, right? If you decide that that's what you're going to do as a country, is export arms. One might argue that's not a pacifist approach, but I do think that gets to the tension, and it's a very important conversation to have. There are, of course, ongoing efforts across civil society collaborations in government to really define feminist foreign policy and grapple with this concept. And then just to say, in the fall, there was a political declaration not on feminist foreign policy, but quote unquote feminist approaches to foreign policy at the UN General Assembly. And 19 countries signed on. And these 19 countries were sort of different, the same, but a little bit different set of countries that really said that they're interested in taking a feminist or more gendered approach to foreign policy. I think importantly, and here's where I'll just touch on the US, you know, it's not easy to say you have a feminist foreign policy, but as I said, it's easier to say it than do it. And I encourage all of us to look at the countries that say they have a feminist foreign policy and really be analytical. Some countries say they have a feminist foreign trade or development policy and are really trying to implement those policies in a very sustained way. Civil society is most often doesn't think they're doing enough, but there are countries that are doing that. There are countries that say they have a feminist foreign policy that really, in our analysis from writing the book, aren't really doing that. They say they have one. Maybe they don't have a lot of political will around it, or one or two people at the very top do. So there are countries that I think don't live up to that expectation. And then there are countries that are doing a lot for addressing gender inequalities that don't say they have a feminist foreign policy. I mean, the US, I would argue, is in that category to some extent. We obviously need to be doing more. We don't have an explicitly feminist foreign policy, and I don't know that we will have one in the foreseeable future. This administration has taken steps to establish a gender policy council at the White House to really do things that I think that many countries that have a feminist foreign policy have done, but we don't have one explicitly. And I think there are other countries that fall into that category as well. And so it's critically important as we have this conversation to really grapple with that as well. And it does go again to this word, feminism. Do countries want to have that label on their foreign policy? And some do, and clearly many don't. And the question is, it's up to really activists in countries to really push on the issues and on their leaders, their leaders both in the domestic and foreign policy sphere, to think about how to adopt a feminist foreign policy. The last thing I would say that's critical, and I say this in particular with regard to the US, but I think it's true everywhere, domestic policy is foreign policy. And one of the things that we are seeing more and more is really people holding that out, which is to say, and this is, I just comment as an American and as a former diplomat, it's true, as the US goes out and engages diplomatically around the world. This is true for every country, but I'll just say with the US, we get judged by what happens at home. And so we as we should be, right? So if we are out as a government advocating for gender equality in a country, or advocating for certain kinds of laws, and we don't have those same laws in our country, I think that does have an impact on our ability to say that we have a kind of a consistent set of policies across the domestic and foreign policy spheres. And that's also, that is something that's really come out through this conversation about feminist foreign policy, which is that it's not just about your outward engagement, right? Your engagement with every country besides your own, but it's about how you think about these issues with respect to your own country, with respect to how your own government, has embarked upon policy matters on a domestic sphere. So with that, I'm going to close. I just want to say, I think, again, this is such a critical topic. There's so much in it to have conversations around. And you, again, the people on this call and the other people who you work with or think about working with, are so critical to this conversation. So I'm just going to, I think the last slide is the book. So again, if people are interested, our book on feminist foreign policy is available on Amazon. I can also put a link in the chat later. But it really, again, talks a lot about what we've talked about here today. But I want to close with saying this is, I think, one of the new and exciting paradigms of foreign policy that people are grappling with all over the world. And so it's exciting because it's new. It's exciting because it provides us with a way to think about foreign policy differently. by centering gender equality, by centering its impact on women and girls. But it also means that there's a lot of room for people to really work on these concepts, because it's not set in stone. It's not, frustratingly, maybe, but maybe in a good thing, it's not something that we know this is what a feminist foreign policy is going to mean for every country. We don't know that. It's inherent upon civil society actors and the government, academics in countries around the world to think about what a feminist foreign policy means for their country, and what it means for their region, and what it means for their outward engagement in the world. So I'm going to close there. I want to thank you so much. And of course, we have time for questions, and I will rely on IMPRI, I think, to sort of identify the questions. And again, thank you so much for asking me. It's really an honor to be here with you today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stephenie. It was a really comprehensive introduction and overview to the issue. And before we take questions, I would like to invite Professor Vibhuti Patel and Dr. Simi Mehta for their comments. And I would like to remind participants to put their question into the Q&A box specifically.
Vibhuti ma'am, your audio is muted.
Okay. So I think thank you for providing such a comprehensive view of the genesis of a feminist foreign policy, and also the major vision, mission, goals and objectives of foreign policy. But in the post-colonial countries, the feminist foreign policy demands from the international relations experts to assess socio-cultural, economic and political issues from an intersectional gendered perspective, and also challenge the international division of labor that subordinates women by segregating women in a monotonous, low-paid, low-status and dead-end industrial job and low-end precarious jobs in service sector or platform-based gig economy. And it also questions, as you also said, the gender stereotypes of viewing man as either aggressor or protector and women as victim in need of protection. So throughout the human history, we have witnessed, and even in some of the recent wars in the Middle East also, we have witnessed situations where men have also been victims of conflict situation as prisoners of war and have faced physical and sexual torture. Recently, if we see, after the South Africa took initiative of demanding accountability of the aggression in Gaza, I think there is a more and more feminists from Africa, Latin America and Asia. They are thinking that we need to be very, very proactive, both from the bottom-up approach, and also that is the women's movement also has to galvanize into action, and also those who are in diplomacy and who are active in diplomatic negotiations, they should also bring these issues center stage. What do you have to say about this? And what is the response of the women's liberation movement in America? Because all of them are now in their 70s, like I am 69. So I know all my contemporaries must be in the 70s and 80s. Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to respond. Although, I'm happy to respond. Look, I think one of the most interesting things that feminist foreign policy and a conversation about feminism really forces us to confront is really the complexity of the world, right? That gender stereotypes hold everyone back in, and that we have them in across, our societies. And I think you point out rightly so that we know that, again, this idea that not every woman is a feminist, not every feminist is a woman, not every person who is subject to gender-based violence is a woman. We have all these things that are kind of built in the way that we tend to, that we've all been socialized, right? The patriarchy has socialized us to believe these things. And that is something that is really important to address as we think about these foreign policies. Intersectionality obviously is a big issue. And I mean, I use the word, of course, we always use the word, increasing the number of women, but it's not just about increasing the number of women, right? It's increasing the number of women of diverse voices, whatever that means, because we need to think about, not every woman is the same. Certainly, I've had a different life experience than you and other people on the call. It depends on your age, where you're from, your race, your caste, your this, and so it's not just obviously about increasing the number of women. It's a bit of a shortcut term, which maybe I shouldn't use, but I think you're right. We need to also be thinking about what does that mean? Because one of the arguments that was alluded to at the beginning, I think by you, is this idea that feminist foreign policy is a Western concept. And that same argument has been made about women, peace, and security. It's a Western feminist concept, when in reality, that is, I think, not the case. Certainly, WPS kind of came from the global South. Most, if not all, many of the great movers of the Beijing platform were women from the global South, right? If we think about now, we look back on Beijing and, everyone seems like, oh, this is such an obvious set of concepts to focus the women's movement on addressing women's economic inequality. That wasn't the case. I mean, women from the global South really brought that to Beijing and really forced that issue. So important for us to not forget our history, but also to, as history or herstory gets made, right, to ensure that there are more diverse voices and that we listen to them and that we support those voices as they are trying to participate in, in foreign policy decision making or in policy decision making writ large. So I think those things are critical. And in terms of the feminist foreign policy concepts, really, that third sort of general concept that we saw, which is to ensure that diverse voices are part of decision making, is just that. How do we do that? That's a harder question. It's easier to say, yes, we should do that. It's harder to do it. I mean, I just put a pin on it. My personal experience, I served at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan. I was hired specifically to do outreach to women's groups. I did that for like a year and a half. We had a lot of women's groups come in and talk to us about the things they thought the U.S. government should be doing to reinforce the work they were doing. Do I think they had an impact? Well, they had an impact on me, but did they have an impact more broadly? I mean, I would argue yes, but I think, again, we all have to grapple with, like, how do you institutionalize that so that it's not just one person or one small set of people who are focused on ensuring that civil society, for example, has more input, but what are the policies and structures that get put in place in these institutions so that happens? So that's kind of where I come down on those. I don't know if I got to all your questions. But
no, I know we all work with honesty of purpose and we try our best. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Patel, and thank you very much, Stephenie, for your wonderful lecture and also for detailing Professor Patel's question. And we have enormous number of questions coming in for you. And given the time, we will focus on a few, and then we'd be happy to send it across to you and have your responses over email, if that works. Varushka, if you can take the few questions that came up, and if it is related to India, for example, from Anupam Shukla ji, and there are many others, we can have that for the Indian expert. That would be more helpful. Thank you so much.
And also, I just put a link to the book in the chat, so just so you have it if you'd like it. Okay, happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I know you'd already spoken about how difficult it is to sort of define what feminist foreign policy means, but there are quite a few questions about exactly that. One, I think that sums it up really well, is from Yashaswini, and she asks, what exactly is feminist foreign policy? How do you differentiate a country's foreign policy, which is, say, pacifist or has a feminist approach, or is focusing on gender equality, but isn't exactly feminist foreign policy. In other words, is there any specific criteria that states the need to essentially claim that they have a feminist foreign policy?
Well, that is the question, right? I mean, I would say, the overall reason that feminist foreign policy is critical or a push towards either a feminist foreign policy or a more gender-focused foreign policy is that we know that when countries are more gender equal, the outcomes are better. I think Secretary Clinton once said, engaging with women is not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. And that is indeed true. So there is no one definition, right? But what we see across these countries is that there are these 4 concepts that they all have. This idea of gender equality as a strategy and a goal, broadening their definition of security, including more diverse voices, trying to address power imbalances. The question becomes, for each country, what does that mean? How do they take those concepts and actually institutionalize them and try to implement them? In some countries, using the word feminist would be very, very difficult. Civil society activists would argue, well, it doesn't matter if it's difficult, but I think for governments that people in power make that determination. Even if they're committed to a more gender-focused foreign policy, do they want to take the step of using the word feminist, which in some places is, I think the word has taken on a meaning it doesn't really have. Because if you look at the dictionary definition of feminism or a feminist, it's someone who believes in the equality of men and women, which I would argue is pretty non-controversial. But it has taken on, I would say this particularly in the US context, but I think around the world, it has taken on other meanings. And so it's become very politicized in some countries, and some governments decide they don't want to use that word and attach it to a foreign policy or any other kind of policy. So I know it's not a great answer, but there is no one feminist foreign policy. I think it adheres to those 4 principles. I think the question really is, how do civil society actors hold governments accountable for what they're doing, whether they call it a feminist foreign policy or not? And, if you look across the countries that have these policies, in every country, the civil society kind of activists have criticisms, as is not surprising, and they should, of the policies. But they also push then their governments to do more. Certainly, interestingly, I would say, just vis-a-vis the US, which does not have a feminist foreign policy, there is a group, the US Coalition for a Feminist Foreign Policy, that has done a scorecard where they've done, given the US kind of a grade on a number of concepts that are broader than the 4 that I talked about, but very specific things that the US government could do. And over, the concepts were developed in like 2018, 2019, and then there's now been a scorecard, I think maybe 2 or 3 scorecards. And so that's a good example of a country that doesn't have a feminist foreign policy, has an active civil society that is actually grading, in quotes, the government's response to a set of concepts that don't say they're explicitly feminist, but are things that are gender focused. So again, I know this is frustrating, right? Because we all want to have a definition. And we did grapple with this tremendously as we were writing this book, because there's one view, as I said, that it's easier to say you have one, a feminist foreign policy, even though I just said some countries hate the word. For some countries, they just could say they have one, and it's almost branding. But are they really taking action? That has to be the question. Like, how do you judge that? And shouldn't we judge that? The answer is, I think yes, but it's a very nebulous set of issues. I think it will become clearer over the years as more countries develop policies, perhaps as more as written by academics, and as we see more of an impact of feminist foreign policies across the globe, it's only been 10 years, right? Margot Wallström announced this in 2014. It's 2024. And as I said, when she announced it, she had a framework, but it wasn't a fully developed set of policies. It was a framework. It wasn't looking at how is this going to really work on a day-to-day basis. So it's a moving target. It's information. It's exciting. It's also frustrating.
Okay, thank you so much. And another sort of theme that I'm seeing is a lot of people asking how in countries or societies that are inherently patriarchal, how does that impact the ability of a government to form a feminist foreign policy? And the inverse of that, if a government is able to adopt a feminist foreign policy, does it impact the mindset or civil society in those countries?
Answer the first, I mean, here's what we know. We know that separate and apart from whether a country has a feminist foreign policy, but we know that when in a country, whether it's because a private sector entity does this or a development entity or the public sector, we know that when women, men, boys, and girls see women in decision-making or see more women in roles that are non-traditional, that it changes their view of what women can do. You know, there's this saying that we use all the time, which is, if you can't see it, you can't be it, right? The idea being if a woman or a girl can't see a woman being a lawyer, she doesn't think about it. It's also true for men and boys, right? The idea isn't just that women need to see it, it's that we all need to see it. We all need to see that people are in jobs that we perhaps didn't think that they could be in or should be in. And that's, this is a continual conversation. That's a nice way to put it. I mean, this is the struggle, right? This is the struggle of feminism. And I would argue, by the way, every country's patriarchal, even Sweden, right? Even if we all think Sweden is the greatest, okay? And I love Sweden, but I mean, every country's patriarchal. Every country has a patriarchal system embedded there. And we all have to deal with it in the way that's appropriate for where we live. The US is different than India. It's different than, Canada, our neighbor. It's different than Mexico, our other neighbor, both of which have feminist foreign policies, I might add. But it's all about, how do we as citizens of our country and then as global citizens push our governments? That's what it's about. I mean, I think patriarchal societies, again, which is all of us, I think the key is to figure out, through the kind of tools of advocacy, which we all know, you are all advocates and there are many effective advocates around the world, how to use that advocacy to push for a feminist foreign policy. I would say arguably to push for maybe breaking down what that means, to a list of very specific things and advocating for those. Like, is it sort of the easiest one in my mind in this area is to have more women diplomats. It's not the answer, but it certainly helps. It's foundational. So maybe, in a lot of countries, a lot of civil society activism or even activism within institutions, right? The women and men who are in the State Department or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs advocating for more women and diverse diplomats. That's a first step, and it's something that's very concrete. Is that feminist foreign policy? No. But you can't have a feminist foreign policy without that, I would argue. And certainly every country that has a feminist foreign trade or development policy in their documents talks about the need to increase the number of women in foreign policy professional positions and to increase the number of women ambassadors, to increase the number of women at the top, to increase the number of women in the military leadership. So every country that has a feminist foreign policy talks about that. Again, that's not all there is, but I think it's important, like really breaking it down. What are the things that are on the advocacy list, right? What are the things that are maybe a little easier, and then what are the stretch things that are, will take years, maybe, or maybe not. But I think, the principles of advocacy are a lot about being specific, right? Having a specific advocacy goal, a specific policy goal, and thinking about how to actually advance that. So, this is a challenge. It's a challenge around the globe. I think one important thing is to understand that we can advocate for a gender-focused foreign policy or for increasing the number of women in positions, all of these things, which are very foundational, with a goal of leading to a more feminist foreign policy or trade or development policy.
Okay, thank you so much. And perhaps our last question today. There were a couple questions since you'd spoken about pacifism and you'd spoken about how countries that have adopted more gender equal or feminist foreign policies are less likely to engage in conflict. There are a couple questions about what the correlation is, what the link is between feminist foreign policy and conflict or pacifism. And can you separate good foreign policy from, say, conflict in some cases?
Okay, I'm going to answer that. I do want to say one thing in response to the last question that I did not. I mean, a couple of other things to think about advocating for that are really critical to foreign policy, a gendered foreign policy, feminist foreign policy, or any foreign policy, is the need for there to be sex disaggregated data, so that we know the impact of things. It can be sex disaggregated, it can be disaggregated by age, but really critical, because if you don't know the impact, differential impact on men, women, boys, girls, or whatever construct you use, you're not going to change your policy. And we owe it as foreign policy professionals to present our decision makers with the best available data, right? Sex disaggregated data is critical, and advocating for gender analysis in every foreign policy decision-making memo or whatever construct the particular foreign ministry uses to make its foreign policy decisions. So that's critical. And there is a push, in the US certainly to do those things. And I think that really critical, I would just say, shout out to our northern neighbors in Canada. They have a gender-based, it's called GBA plus, gender-based analysis plus, where it's not just a gender-based analysis, but they bring in other demographic indicators as well. And the Canadian government has mandated that for all policies, right? Every policy that gets made in Canada has to use this type of gender-based analysis. So I think very, very important, two also very, very important things. On the issue, look, I think this is a complicated issue around pacifism, conflict, and feminist foreign policy. One of the things that happened when Margot Wallström was foreign minister is very illustrative of this. So I'm going to use this as an example. So when Margot Wallström was foreign minister, Sweden is a very large arms exporter. If those of you don't know that, again, we love Sweden. They were exporting arms at the time to Saudi Arabia, and Margot Wallström made a decision to stop the sale of arms to Saudi Arabia based on human rights concerns, including Saudi Arabia's treatment of women. That decision did not last long. Let's just put it that way. And I think it's very instructive. I mean, there were a lot of things that happened, both from kind of a foreign policy perspective, where she was disinvited to speak to the Arab League. Obviously, Saudi Arabia did not want her to come there. And there was a movement within Swedish sort of corporate and the public and private sphere to change that policy of hers, and Sweden changed it. So, I mean, I think it's really important for us to understand there are just lots of overlays, right? No large institution can really change course immediately. And a country has a lot of imperatives, a lot of foreign policy imperatives. So it's complicated. Again, as I mentioned, most people would say, kind of intuitively perhaps, that they think a feminist foreign policy is pacifist. But if you look across the countries that have one, again, whether it's a feminist foreign trade or development policy, and look at their policies, that's not necessarily true. We have to distinguish between that and not engaging in conflict as readily, right? Pacifism is different than decisions that walk you back from conflict. That's not pacifism. That's a different approach to conflict. And I think it's, it's a little nuanced. It's not that nuanced, but it is true. It's different. And I think those are the kind of things that countries have to grapple with. And then I think civil society needs to be willing to have those conversations within itself, but also with government, because it is different. Pacifism is different than a country being less conflict prone or maybe less adverse to initiating conflict. That's different than pacifism. So those are some of the constraints of this conversation. And we don't live in a perfect world, what I would argue. And what this is about pushing these institutions and this conversation so that we do have a new and different way of addressing foreign policy globally. Again, as I said, it's been 10 years. In 20 years, this conversation, it'll be a really interesting time. What happens in another 10 years? Where does this go? And in a lot of ways, it's up to all of us where it goes. So I'm encouraged that so many people are interested in this conversation and you're asking the right questions. That encourages me too. There aren't always good answers, right? And it's up to all of us to develop those answers together, and specifically in the context in which we all work. So again, I want to, thank you all for having me be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. We loved having you, and we hope we can continue to speak to you further. Again, thank you for such a comprehensive introductory and inaugural session. We had quite a few questions on YouTube as well, but we will compile them and send you a very long email. But thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us. And in the interest of time, I would like to move on to our next session.
Thank you so much. I'm going to sign off, but I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to hearing from all of you in the future.
Thank you. I look forward to having you in other future projects. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our next session, I am honored to invite Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, retired professor, international relations at Jadavpur University, Kolkata, now a visiting professor at IMPRI, for her speech on feminist foreign policy, origin and trajectory. We welcome you, ma'am. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Varushka. In fact, thanks very much to IMPRI, especially Dr. Arjun Kumar, Professor Vibhuti Patel, Simi also. And I must thank the Asia Foundation too for organizing this. And quite apart from that, the last speaker, Stephenie Foster, who has made my task much easier. But because she has given an introduction to which, in fact, I am grateful for. May I have the PowerPoint, please?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Now, basically, today is a special day. As has been mentioned, it's the International Day for Women in Diplomacy. And it is what it says it is. It celebrates women in diplomacy and the work that they do. And it's interesting also, I just wanted to point out that the UN uses the word women, not feminist, which is controversial, which is debatable. There has been so much controversy around it. So you have International Women's Day, you have International Day for Women in Multilateralism, International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women, but it's always women. It's not feminist. Whereas on the other hand, you have feminist foreign policy, which in fact from the very beginning, there has been basically a lot of problems about. Sweden introduced this in 2014, as it says, it's been there for the last 10 years. Now, according to Ms. Foster, there are 16 countries, but Sweden withdrew in 2022. So I think as of 2024, there are 15 countries which have adopted or have basically given their stated their intention to join to introduce feminist foreign policy. I have been warned by Simi already in the morning to keep to the time, but we have already gone over time. So I will try and make it as short as possible. I will talk about the origins, which I've been asked to do. And basically, I have to discuss, well, what is FFP for people to understand the importance of FFP and why it is needed and why it is debated in the first place. Because, well, Ms. Foster gave one view, but there are many views. So basically that has to be debated, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that. And what it involves is, of course, feminist IR theory. So I'm going to bring that in also. And finally, basically the trajectory, what is the future, given the fact, in fact, that the world, well, there are conflicts in the world, ongoing conflicts, which seem to have no end at all whatsoever. And in fact, currently there's a rightward trend, or rightward nationalist trend in many countries, both developing and basically developed. But first, of course, the origins, which is there already on the screen. So in fact, the origin can be traced to the UDHR 1948, which called for gender equality by stating that all human beings, regardless of sex, among many other things, of course, are born equal and are entitled to all the human rights and freedoms which have been outlined in the UDHR. Then, of course, in the 1970s, the women's movement began to take center stage, and it came to the limelight. And here, in fact, after that, you find that the UN, multilateral institution, the UNGA, organized the first World Women's Conference in 1975 and declared this year to be the International Women's Year. And a voluntary fund for women was also established during this conference. This was followed by the UNGA's passing of the International Bill of Rights of Women, 1979, and then the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, 1979, which of course is a landmark convention. Next, the World Conference to review and appraise the achievements of the United Nations Decade for Women, Equality, Development and Peace. This was held in Nairobi, 1985, and this is important because it brought in the words development and peace. Now, thus bringing in basically international political economy, or IPE, and, well, a bit of foreign policy with peace, all right. In fact, some have called this event the birth of global feminism, because the document also declared that all issues are women's issues. 157 countries participated and adopted the Nairobi forward-looking strategies to the year 2000. More than 15,000 NGOs also participated in a parallel NGO forum. In 1995, another World Women's Conference was held in Beijing, which adopted the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. This asserted that women's rights are human rights and committed itself to a particular action to guarantee basically respect for these rights. The Economic and Social Council, the ECOSOC, expanded the Commission on the Status of Women in 1996 to fill certain gaps in the Beijing Declaration. And of course, one knows that the CSW is a global intergovernmental body exclusively committed to the promotion of gender equality and women's empowerment. Next slide, please. In 2010, the UNGA merged 4 different agencies, the DAW, the UNIFEM, I'm giving the short forms, the UN International Research and Training Institute for Women, and the Office of the Special Advisor on Gender Issues to create one single UN body, the UN Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women. It's also called UN Women, to advance gender equality and women's empowerment. And of course, Goal 5 of the SDGs of 2015 is to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls by 2030. Next slide, please. This is all, of course, the UNGA. Now comes the UNSC, the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council passed resolution, you can see in the left-hand panels, the 1325 of 2000, and this is basically Women, Peace and Security, the WPS agenda. And this was basically a landmark resolution addressing the impact of war on women and the importance of women's full and equal participation in conflict resolution, peace building, peacekeeping, humanitarian response, and post-conflict reconstruction. The resolution also called for special measures to protect women and girls from conflict-related sexual violence and outlined gender-related responsibilities of the UN in different political and pragmatic areas. Now, the UNGA resolutions and conventions dealt largely with women's development and equality and empowerment. But this resolution is in the domain of foreign policy, acknowledging the need to adopt a gender perspective during conflict, repatriation, reintegration, post-conflict reconstruction, emphasizing the importance of women's equal involvement in peace and security, which of course include diplomacy and foreign policy, but goes well beyond it to reaffirm women's empowerment and development. And one must also point out there are 9 further resolutions on gender-related issues, including Resolution 2467 on sexual violence in conflicts. Now, it is important to note that Resolution 1325 just did not emerge from just anywhere. It was the culmination of a process that had begun in 1995 at the Beijing Platform for Action, which contained an entire chapter on women, peace, and conflict, which was followed up 5 years later at the Beijing Conference's 5th anniversary. NGOs and civil society also played a critical role in its passage, especially after the wars of the 1990s, that is in Bosnia, Rwanda, West Africa, where in fact the negative impact of war and conflict on women was self-evident. However, one finds that as of 2024, only 101 UN member states which have ratified have drawn up national action plans as encouraged by the UNSC to fulfill the resolution's objectives. And even fewer countries have given any funding for WPS. I'm not going to go into all the local and regional conventions like the Istanbul Convention or the Council of Europe 2008 for shortage of time. In fact, what I've detailed so far, the UN conventions, they provide sufficient background of international law to explain the emergence of feminist foreign policy. Next slide, please. Sweden was the first country to introduce a feminist foreign policy in 2014, where the then Foreign Minister, Margot Wallström, emphasized the link between women's participation in global politics and sustainable peace, and the notion that women's empowerment positively impacts on national and international security. The focus was on 3 R's: women's rights, resources, and representation. However, in October 2022, Sweden, in fact, was the first country to retract from its feminist foreign policy when the new foreign minister, Tobias Billström, announced that the term feminist foreign policy is no longer going to be used by the Swedish government. And I'll go into this later again. In 2017, Canada embarked on a feminist international assistance policy, prioritizing economic empowerment, peace, and security. France followed in 2018 with its Diplomatie Feminist, or feminist diplomacy, prioritizing diplomatic negotiations and development cooperation. Luxembourg, too, announced its intention to pursue a feminist foreign policy. In 2020, Mexico introduced a feminist foreign policy, and this was the first non-European country. And in fact, this is important because it was at par with feminist ideals because it aimed to reduce and eliminate, and I'm quoting, structural differences, gender-based discrepancies, and inequalities. Spain and Libya, in fact, is important because it is the first non-European country. Well, basically, they decided to adopt a feminist foreign policy in 2021. And post-election Germany's 3 parties, the SDP, the FD, and the Greens, agreed on a coalition agreement committing to a feminist foreign policy. In 2022, Chile and Colombia followed suit, and the Netherlands and Liberia announced their intention to do so. But so far, what is important is that no Asian country has committed to FFP, although Mongolia has joined the Feminist Foreign Policy Plus group in the UN, which engages with the topic. And interestingly, none of the major powers, and that is very important, the US, Russia, China, none of them actually speak of foreign policy in FFP terms. Next slide, please, which brings me to my second point. What is feminist foreign policy? It is easy to talk about foreign policy where realist and neo-realist thoughts dominate, reifying the state and prioritizing sovereignty, which emphasize self-help, survival, security, and the maximization of national interests defined in terms of power. The message is that in an anarchical international order, there is little opportunity to pursue foreign and security policies that rest on either ethical considerations. Ethical considerations would mean care, which in fact Ms. Foster was talking about, or emancipatory messages such as feminism. At another end are the critical analysis of IR ranging from communitarianism to cosmopolitanism that discuss the tension between statist obligations to co-nationalists and the cosmopolitan duties to distant others. In fact, in practice, however, despite the continuing national interest-centered approach of states to foreign policy, states and multilateral institutions have exhibited a growing emphasis on ethical and moral duties to protect the interests of others. Yet, when it comes to scholarship or academic scholarship of ethical foreign policy, almost entirely it lacks a focus on gender or gender justice, and it is mostly gender neutral. Next slide, please. In contrast, feminist scholarship places gender equality, discrimination, and violence at the center of the analysis of foreign policy conduct and discourse. These are actually cartoons which I'd love to explain, but for shortage of time, I would not. But you can see from here, there's of course, well, here's humanitarian aid, and then you have on the other hand, well, arms trade, intersectional feminism, which I'm going to talk about, matters. Feminism is feminism, everything matters. Intersectional is everything. Anyway, next slide, please. Feminist IR theory challenges the invisibility of gender and the absence of women in international relations on many fronts. And the critical engagements include liberal feminists, radical, post-structuralist, and post-colonial perspectives, just to mention a few. This means that there are multiple perspectives which are often divergent in feminist IR theory. Most of the approaches, however, despite all this divergence, rest on reflexivity and inclusivity as key components of the research process. While mainstream IR theory largely tends to view states, nations, sovereignty, and identities as given entities, feminist IR scholars argue that such categories are socially constructed and framed within gendered practices and power relations. The public sphere of state institutions has largely been associated with men and masculinity in which women have no room. Therefore, feminist scholars are highly skeptical of the transformative potential of state-generated feminism. There are some, in fact, scholars like Laura Shepard, whom I mentioned last, who challenges even the WPS agenda as being gendered because it embeds the myth that women are in need of masculinized protection. In fact, Sweden's FFP was also criticized for the same thing with the addition of Western. That is, basically distant other women were in need of Western masculine protection, giving it basically a colonial racist color. So given the multiple streams of thought, what is FFP? Or specifically, what does a feminist foreign policy look like? Indeed, in fact, there is neither any agreed upon definition of FFP, although I will quote a much cited one, or rather give the quotation and not really quote it, nor is gender parity and attempts to include more women in foreign policy structures enough to realize a comprehensive feminist foreign policy. According to Cynthia Enlow, this would only imply embedding women inside a patriarchal system, but fail to challenge underlying gender norms that fuel violence and conflict. Next slide, please. Now, this is the quotation, which I'm not going to basically read. I'll just kind of analyze it a little bit because it's right there in front of you. So you can read it yourself, and I'm sure it's going to be shared too. According to Thompson, Patel, Kripke, and McDonnell, and I've given the reference also over there, so you can look it up yourself. A feminist approach to foreign policy requires deeper reflection and analysis of the potential power structures and inequalities in the world, seeking to challenge systems of oppression, marginalization, and exclusion, and moving beyond binary approaches to consultation and inclusion of women to ensure their meaningful engagement in decision making. Not only women, but groups and movements at home and abroad. But what I'd like you to notice is basically the title of the article from which this is taken, Towards a Feminist Foreign Policy in the United States. So one must place this definition in context. It is aimed at promoting a feminist foreign policy in the US, which in fact was not mentioned. This has not yet signed, or this is not yet ratified, the CEDAW. Although in fact Jimmy Carter signed it, but it has not been ratified, partly because opponents in the US Congress are opposed to the convention's advocacy of reproductive rights, and you know what is happening with reproductive rights in many of the states in the United States right now, and enforcement of gender-neutral work rules. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a well thought out definition aimed at US foreign policy, but it has been critiqued by many scholars from very different areas. Marxist feminists presuppose the abolition of capitalism and therefore basically cannot go with this. Queer feminists seek to overcome heteronormativity and the gender binary. And basically there are others also who embrace further identities such as the LGBTQIA+. There is also criticism of white feminism for reproducing racist and colonial ideas and structures. Next slide, please. I'm not going to discuss this any further because of the lack of time, and I'm sure others will discuss it. But let me mention this central question that are being discussed today within feminism regarding FFP are the issue of the role of a biological basis for gender differentiation and inequality in society, the relationship between feminism as political activism and advocacy, and feminism as an academic discipline. Reform, that is, the value of gradual corrections within potential structures to lesser asymmetries versus transformation, that is, transformative policies that may even accentuate gender differentiation. Such debates result from the tension between feminist theories, which are pluralistic, and theories of the state and state sovereignty that underpin mainstream IR theory, which I've already mentioned. Next slide, please. So the moot question remains, in the countries that have declared a commitment to a feminist foreign policy, what is the reality? What is the fundamental thrust of the feminist factor in their foreign policies? What is the substance behind the rhetoric of FFP? Feminist foreign policy seeks to, as I've said, disrupt racist, colonial, and patriarchal power dynamics by prioritizing peace, gender equality, and environmental integrity. Also, they have long argued that the effects of multiple intersecting crises on human rights, on women's human rights, economic justice, and climate justice cannot be addressed or mitigated without systemic change. But the FFPs have often struggled to translate this analytical framework into actionable, coherent, structural solutions beyond commitments to increasing women's representation and or nominal increases in funding for gender equality. And that is what you see. More women in diplomacy, well, a slight rise in funding for gender equality, but basically not much else. And one of the reasons for this is basically the exclusionary security approach, which seems to have become the norm in conflict resolution. And basically, the issue that we find is basically feminism versus national interest. Okay, the next slide, please, which will in fact give, this is the findings of ICRW, that is the International Center for Research on Women. And I've given you the basically the citing here, so you can really look it up yourself. It gives the methodologies, which I've not really mentioned over here. This is the 2023 survey. 48 countries were surveyed, including the countries that basically have introduced or are going to introduce, and this is on a scale of 1 to 0. And here, of course, Sweden scores the highest, as you can see, with 0.8, followed by Norway, Mexico, Finland, Costa Rica, Peru, Germany. But the general trend seems to be between 0.5 and 0.6. But I'd like you to look at the last point. The 5 countries with the lowest scores: United States 0.12, India 0.24, China 0.28, Turkey 0.31, Israel and Korea 0.34. Next slide, please. One of the reasons, of course, is arms export. Here, in fact, I've just cited 4 countries which have opted for, one of them did opt and has opted out for FFP. France, Germany, Spain, and Sweden. France is the 3rd largest arms exporter. It doesn't really matter because, well, arms export is part of trade. But what matters is where you are exporting arms to, where there is conflict, and where basically there are human rights, women's rights violations. Germany approved 1 billion euros in arms deals to countries involved in conflicts in Yemen and Libya, and we know exactly what is happening there. Spain also has failed to pay sufficient attention to the recommendations of the UN group of eminent international and regional experts on Yemen. And in fact, they continue to basically grant licenses to Saudi Arabia and UAE. Sweden, in fact, Ms. Foster has already pointed out that it was, it has been blamed for continuing to basically supply arms to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Primarily, in fact, they did revoke, but well, it's back again. It's very much there. That is one of the things. And they, UAE and Saudi Arabia, pass on these to Yemen. So basically, there are problems. Now, so basically, this is lucrative, and that is why. So what you find is, this is a classic example of tension between the demands of traditional neorealist security system and the demands of feminist IR theorists. Next slide, please. But one must point out that gender sensitivity is normally linked more with center-left or liberal governments. And here, in fact, I've given basically Sweden. The center-left Social Democrats were in power in Sweden for 8 years, and then they were replaced in 2022 by a 3-party center-right government with the help of Sweden Democrats, which is a far-right party. The coalition not only retracted on FFP, but they also ended one of the most liberal migration policies in Europe, immigration policy in Europe, and they signaled expansion of nuclear power, which in fact the previous government had started to dismantle. Sweden has also joined the NATO, as I'm sure you're aware of, which is a military alliance. The reason I'm mentioning this is because there is a shift to the right in many countries of the world with a resultant emphasis on particularist nationalism, moving away from the ethics of care for the distant other. In the recent elections, too, in fact, this should be another slide. In fact, next slide. Yeah. In fact, what you find is that far-right parties made significant gains in the European Parliament elections held in June 2004, this very month, earlier this month. And especially in Italy, France, and Germany, 2 of these are committed to FFP. The right groups like the ECR and the ID, ID group hosts, in fact, Francis Marine Le Pen, and her National Rally Party. They have boosted their presence. The trend can also be seen at the national level in Europe, where the far right is part of the growing coalitions in Finland, Sweden, Netherlands, Italy, and Croatia. This influence of the far right has already been felt in the migration policy in the EU. And in fact, probably the far right agrees on this is probably the only issue on which the far right really agrees. What you find is that there have been a series of agreements with countries in the EU's neighborhood aimed at basically preventing immigrants from reaching the EU, regardless of the poor human rights records of some of these countries like Libya and Tunisia. Further, EU countries frame migration as a security threat, prompting, in fact, border control policies, including the new Pact on Migration and Asylum adopted by the EU Council in May. The far right also opposes the EU's Green Deal policy on climate and energy to achieve zero carbon emissions by 2050. All these go against what Canada, Germany, and Sweden had embedded in their directives on feminist foreign policy. However, there are many scholars, and basically here we can basically see on the right side, the right panel, many scholars are of the opinion that a feminist-oriented foreign policy is here to stay because it is embedded in a web of international norms, institutions, and agreements like the CEDAW and the SDG 5, which I have already detailed earlier. While soft regulations decided on by the by IGOs and institutions like the WTO and the World Bank to ensure gender equality are not binding on states, there is a growing body of international law and regulations which are binding. So they provide a legally binding framework for gender equality. Even on arms trade, there is Article 7.4 of the 2014 UN Arms Trade Treaty, and this requires that state parties assess the risk that exports will, and I'm quoting, be used to commit or facilitate serious acts of gender-based violence or serious acts of violence against women and children before allowing trade. So there is this which has been coming in. Next slide. So the trajectory of FFP. It is a rocky path, and so far there has been more rhetoric than practice, and in fact there's more labeling than practicing, one can say. And what I am suggesting is that, and in fact many have suggested, whether one should be using gender-sensitive foreign policy rather than feminist foreign policy, because the word feminist is value-loaded, and in fact it has plural interpretations and is much contested. And also because across all interactions, FFP appears to have three main priorities: protect women's rights, promote gender equality, increase women's participation and representation in global politics. And although I am using the word women, I mean intersectionality, which is the study of overlapping, intersecting social identities and related systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. But this can be, of course, a topic for another discussion. Last slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was a very comprehensive, but also very much backed in theory and a very theoretical talk, and we're very much grateful to have had that. I would like to invite our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel, and Dr. Simi Mehta for their comments before we take questions.
Thank you, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, for a very, very informative and analytically robust session. Most of the Asian countries have refused to use the term feminist, so has India. They all want to focus on gender equality. But at the same time, those grassroots feminist organizations, they feel that last 4 years of the post-pandemic reality, you see a backlash on any kind of women's rights. All those small 18 countries where women head of the nations have done excellent work. So many of them have resigned, and they are facing tremendous hyper-masculinity and misogyny. So do you think this is a passing phase, or we'll have to really work hard to gain whatever achievements we had in a pre-pandemic period, especially the women's predicament in the world of work?
Thank you so much for your question. In fact, I wouldn't know whether to call this a backlash, or basically it's a nationalist kind of, right-wing resurgence, which has caused basically this kind of, what you're calling misogyny. But I would call it basically the defeat of many, women leaders. This is possibly a passing phase. We do go through the left and the right. So once the right has been in power for some time, I'm sure the left or the left center or liberals will come back. And then, of course, one can look forward to more gender equal. In fact, I'm not going to say that there's going to be what should I say, gender equality will be put in the back burner. If you look at also women leaders, okay, in part, all right, when it comes to, there are women leaders basically in important positions in diplomacy and all that, but they have to follow the national interest. So if basically you have a right-leaning government in power, whether it's a woman or a man, they'll have to follow what the nation directs, all right? So basically it's not basically a man or a woman or anything like that. And it is primarily, we're talking in terms of, the trends in foreign policy, all right? So going back, Sweden going backward, all right, and winning. In Europe, many, basically the writers are winning, and let us see what happens, they're saying UK, well, it might be different, but whether foreign policy will be different, we do not know, definitely. If Trump wins in the United States, okay, that's another question altogether. So this is a phase, but gender equality and the, one may say, basically the way forward towards gender equality, that is going to be ongoing, certainly. And all these international conventions, etc., which are there, and these states have ratified, all right, CEDAW and well, other institutions, I mean, the 1325 resolution on women peace. So these, of course, will very much will help gender equality to move forward, if that answers your question.
Diplomats are bound by national interests, but when such a mass-scale sexual violence is happening in 43 places on this globe, why nobody is raising any voice? When women from Bangladesh the mass rape happened in 1971, whole world community was out, and that time there was no women's movement. Out of sheer decency, that you just can't do such thing during the war. There are certain ground rules even about the war. So why nothing is happening, especially what's happening currently, in Gaza or even Ukraine? The reports we are getting, they are so unnerving. Why nothing is happening? Even women in diplomacy, they are not saying that. At least dignity of women and bodily integrity of women, that is the one thing which should evoke response from them.
You're absolutely right. And that is why, in fact, I am calling feminist foreign policy, like, in fact, the Swedish, is more of a label. Now, why are they not really responding? If they're talking about feminist foreign policy and what is happening in Gaza is a shame, as such. Well, if women from Israel were abducted and they were also subjected to violence, that also is a shame, definitely.
Yes,
so basically, why is nobody protesting? People did protest, at least, we talk about Bangladesh, and India took the lead, certainly in that. Okay, and quite apart from that, when it happened in Bosnia, Europe took the lead. All right. When it comes to Gaza, when it comes to basically the Palestinians, is it because they're not a state? I have no idea. Basically, why they're not taking this into account, or is it because of, well, the Israeli arms trade, which is all over the world, kind of, you see, links that countries have with Israel. Look at, in fact, the way India reacted initially. Of course, now it hardly says a thing. And it never says a thing about, basically, it does not really talk about violence against women. Do you find any official statement on that? No. So primarily, I mean, the silence on Gaza, in fact, maybe the civil society should take this. The states are not good. States, as I said, I mean, they have their own interests in mind, which is basically based on their own sovereignty and their own national interests, and, well, when here, the arms trade and everything, all that is kind of involved in. So what the states do and what civil society does. In fact, this is a case, I think, for civil society, the women's organizations.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna quickly sum up our two major questions. The first one being, what do you think are the implementational challenges of feminist foreign policy in India? And the second one being more about the ethical dilemmas when feminist principles conflict with national interest or geopolitical strategies. And how does that impact the country's relations in the international realm?
Could you repeat the first one, please?
What are the implementational challenges of feminist foreign policy in India?
Okay. I'm sorry, I look like a ghost in this. I do not know. Maybe the lighting is all wrong, but I must correct this anyway. Okay. Now, implementation challenges in India. Now, India does not have an FFP. And whether it intends to have an FFP, not under the present government, certainly. You may have a woman foreign minister, but that also is not well there right now. But basically, no, we don't have an FFP. And as you could see, the record that I gave, India is among the lowest so far as the study showed that it's among just above the United States, which is the lowest, or as such in this kind of gender equality in FFP. Okay, now the other one is basically the ethical dilemmas. In fact, that is what I've been talking about. There is a lot of ethical dilemma in, here we go into various aspects of IR theory. One is, of course, the ethical theory of foreign policy. All right, that is the ethics of care. Okay, but ethics of care also is gender neutral, if you really look at it. Okay, it does not talk about, well, any gender or whatever. Ethics of care is everybody. All right, it's across sections. Okay, so when it comes to ethics of care, primarily that needs to be amended, the theory part of it. But there are ethical dilemmas definitely in foreign policy, and that is why ethics of care has nothing to do with gender, because there are lots of people in need of care. All right, it's just not basically women and girls. There are many others, young boys also are in need of care, children, okay, are in need of care, old people, men and women are in need of care, heterosexuals, they are in need of care, of a very different type of care. Transvestites are in need of care in different countries, okay, where there are laws against basically, homosexuals, etc. They are in need of care. So ethics of care is not just women and this thing. So there are ethical dilemmas. What do you mean by a feminist foreign policy? What is feminist? Okay, so that has to be seen. As I said, there are many types of feminism in IR theory. There are many types of feminism in feminist theory. Okay, so what exactly are you talking about? So if you talk about basically ethical dilemmas, each one has a different ethical dilemma, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. And again, thank you again for such a strong theoretical backbone, because there were a couple of questions about what sort of feminism are we talking about when we practice feminist foreign policy. But yes, thank you so much for answering our questions, and thank you for spending time with us today, and thank you for being so respectful of our time. In the interest of which I would like to move on to our next session, but we hope to continue seeing you back at IMPRI, and we enjoy every time you speak with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here, especially on this and speaking about this. Thank you
for being so forthright and bold.
Thank you so much, Patel. Yeah. I enjoy talking to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. And so moving on to our final session, I'm honored to invite Ambassador Latha Reddy, retired officer of the Indian Foreign Services and the former Deputy National Security Advisor to India, the former Indian Ambassador to Portugal and Thailand, and the co-chairman at the Global Commission on Stability in Cyberspace, for her speech on foreign policy and diplomacy. We welcome you, ma'am, and thank you for your patience with us today. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Before I begin, I just wanted a quick clarification. Should I speak for half an hour, or what would you like? Because I have got remarks prepared, but I'd also like to interact with the participants, whom I'm sure will have many questions.
Yes, that
So
will be.
how would you like me to do this?
Please take half an hour, then we'll have interaction session. Not an issue.
Okay, so I can speak for half an hour and then we'll have an interaction.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much. Well, firstly, let me say that I must thank the organizers for asking me to speak on the International Day of Women in Diplomacy. As a practitioner of diplomacy, a lifelong feminist, and a proponent of gender equality, I'm delighted to share my experiences with all of you. My remarks will largely be on India's foreign policy, the experience of women in the Ministry of External Affairs, and my own experiences. As most of you might know, we were very lucky because of the freedom struggle. It was decided right from the beginning that women would be admitted into the Foreign Service. Ms. Muthama in 1949, Ms. Sibi Muthama, was the first woman diplomat to be admitted. She had to fight against many obstacles. No ambassador would accept her. At that point, there was a rule that no married women could join the service. So she stayed a lifelong single woman. Later, of course, that restriction was removed. They were the first few women in the Foreign Service faced enormous obstacles. There were unequal opportunities. They were automatically slotted into what I would call non-challenging postings. And they had to really battle against the sort of entrenched feelings of patriarchy and so on. Now the situation is quite different. About 30 to 40% of the intake in the Indian Foreign Service are women, compared to my generation where the intake was only about 10%. I mean, already, if you look at the gap between 1949 and 1975, by the time I joined, 25 years plus had passed. And by then, the situation had improved. The participation of women had gone up. But as you can see, it's a rising trend. And that encourages me very much. There were, of course, many glass ceilings to be overcome. We were fortunate in that India was one of the few countries where we had 3 women foreign secretaries. We had Chokila Iyer in 2001. We had Nirupama Rao in 2009. And we had Sujata Singh in 2015. But there were many glass ceilings to be broken other than simply having a woman as the head of the Foreign Service. There was a sort of a feeling that women couldn't be given very challenging postings, but I would say that myth has been dispelled quite effectively because we've had women ambassadors in the US, we've had women ambassadors in China, we've had women ambassadors in major countries like France and Germany. But yet, we have not had women ambassadors in Russia. We have never had a woman ambassador in Pakistan, and we've never had a woman ambassador in Saudi Arabia. Perhaps part of the reason is that there were not enough women at the senior level to represent India at that time. But that is certainly not the case today. So I'm hoping that these last few glass ceilings will also come down and women are not considered not capable enough to take up these challenges. I was interested to hear Stephenie Foster say that, quoting me as saying that feminism is an off-putting term to many. That may be so, but even so, I believe we really do need to stand up for these values. And I think as far as my experiences are concerned, as a woman, as I said, I faced fewer obstacles by 1975, but there were several challenges. And I'd like to talk about some of the things I feel I achieved, which were regarded as sort of breakthrough events. One was I extradited Abu Salem, who at that time was the second most wanted criminal in India, from Portugal. And as they say, I got my 15 minutes of fame for that. I was also Deputy National Security Advisor in the government. And I handled internal security, I handled external security, I handled all the intelligence agencies. And I found that extremely challenging, extremely interesting, because after 36 years in diplomacy as a practitioner, to move to being an advisor in the national security sphere was quite a different experience. But I must say it was an enormous challenge and one that I enjoyed very much. My lasting contribution, I think, to that time was when I worked on the various cyber issues. We were able to come up with India's first cybersecurity policy. We were able to come up with an architecture for the government to deal with cybersecurity. And we were able to also set up the first joint working group on cybersecurity between the government and the private sector. I regard this really as my lasting contribution to national security. And I take great pride in it. And I think that the other challenge I faced was when I had to conduct some extradition operations for our citizens in distress. And the first one I did was in Thailand, where we had, we had 15,000 Indian tourists who were stranded because the airport had been barricaded and, sort of made inaccessible, all airports in the country by rioters. And we had to get these 15,000 people out, and we worked very, very hard. And it was very hard because at the same time, 26/11 had happened in Bombay. And as a result, everybody in Delhi was so preoccupied with that, nobody could give me the attention I needed, or the help or the assistance I needed to do this. But working together with the Thai authorities, we were able to actually make sure that all the stranded Indian tourists were given free border lodging, those who needed it. And also to then start, we were the first country to start operating international flights, because I coordinated with Air India and with Jet Airways at that time to essentially start running special flights from a military airport. And it was quite a session, we had to, we were actually assisting the staff, and my staff and I, we were running around telling people you have to carry your own baggage, you have to sit on the ground, you have to fill out your boarding passes, you have to, and assisting people who needed assistance and getting them into these flights. And we ran several, special flights from the military airbase before things came back to normal. The second one, which was, I would in many ways say was even more challenging, was when we had to evacuate 16,000 stranded Indians from Libya in war conditions, because the war had broken out. And NATO and others were bombing Libya left, right, and center. We had 16,000 people in inaccessible locations, in labor camps, in factory accommodation, in remote parts of the country. And we had to somehow get them all safely to either Benghazi or to Tripoli, and put them either on, some of them went overland, but those were only about 2,000 people in the initial stages who had the means and the ability to go overland. What these companies did was rather shameful, because they just abandoned the workers, and they were completely stranded. And we had to organize even the transport to bring them up to Benghazi or to Tripoli. And there, you know, the ambassador at one stage had to house more than 2,000 people on the lawns of the embassy. And the ambassador was a very brave woman called Mani Mekalai, who later got an award for her services, was under bullet fire. You know, the embassy was under bullet fire. And yet under those conditions, she functioned, she negotiated with the Gaddafi government, she managed to get permission. And our job in India, and my job primarily, was to coordinate, to send out, you know, all the assistance we could. So what did we do? We took some people overland to Tunisia, where they were looked after by embassy in Tunis. More people went to Egypt, where they were looked after by an embassy in Egypt. But as I said, that was only 2,000. And the remaining 16,000 had to be evacuated. And we had to engage 6 cruise ships and basically send them down to either Benghazi or to Tripoli to evacuate these stranded Indians. And we also had to fly 56 special flights. It was difficult. Air India flew to Tripoli. Benghazi, it was not possible to land flights. So, you know, these were some of the challenges you had to face. And you have to show a great deal of leadership, commitment. I don't think I slept more than 2 or 3 hours a night for that whole 6 weeks of that evacuation. It was absolutely grueling. And we had a great team, of course, the Foreign Secretary, myself, I was Secretary East in charge of the relationship with Libya, and Jayant Prasad, the Special Secretary, was put on duty. The 3 of us worked as a team, and we worked with the Indian Navy, we worked with, you know, and we got a lot of cooperation from Air India. We got a lot of cooperation from Egypt Air, who flew 56 flights from Egypt back to India. And, you know, we had to set up stations in Malta. I had to send staff on special duty to Libya to assist the ambassador. It was really a challenge. And again, I count that as one of my great achievements. I think the interesting thing about Indian foreign policy is that, you know, the foreign policy correspondents in India, the best ones really, in my opinion, have all been women. And that makes it quite interesting. Why it is that women are considered more appropriate to cover, you know, foreign policy issues. That's something for us to ponder about. Also, in think tanks, while a huge number of women work in think tanks as researchers, scholars, but they're not in the top leadership positions. Most of the leading institutions in India today are headed, think tank institutions in India today are headed by men, not by women. And that makes me think in some ways that we have succumbed to what I call the pink collar ghetto. You know, this was a term I coined when I was posted in the US in the 80s, because I realized that while a lot of women in the US worked, many of them were not in leadership positions. You know, they were secretaries, not the executives. They were nurses, not the doctors. They were teachers, but not the principals of schools. And I then said, you know, you've got blue collar workers, and you've got white collar workers, and you've got pink collar workers who are the pink collar ghetto, according to me. And this, I think, is what has happened in a way to the think tanks of India. And it's interesting that while the journalists are mainly women, the think tankers are still led by men. The other situation, which I think is very important for us, is that we have not very good representation in our political leadership, by which I mean parliament. It is nowhere near ideal. As you know, we've been striving for a long time to have 33% representation of women in parliament. It actually dropped from 14.4%, which it was in 2019 elections, to 13.6% in 2024. But it's obviously risen over the years, because it was 2.9% in 1957. And, it was 2.9% of women candidates contested, compared to 10% of women today. But it's obviously far below what it should be. And in 2024, the depressing statistic is that India fell to rank number 143 out of 185 countries in terms of women's representation in parliaments. I think, and you compare this with, say, South Africa, which has 46%, and that's fascinating. How did South Africa do this? South Africa did this because when the ANC contested the elections, and I was fortunate to be part of that process, I was posted in South Africa at that time, and I was an election observer. South Africa said that we will have, one woman candidate, one male candidate, right down the list, because the way they worked was not by constituencies. The party was voted for all over the country, and they had a list of 400 candidates, and they said it'll be one man, one woman, one man, one woman, one man, one woman. And they went on to do that. And because they did that, the other parties were forced to also have more women candidates than they would normally have had. And the net result was that South Africa has stayed very, very high in the representation question, and even today is at 46%. So these are some of the issues, while I don't think quotas are always the answer, in some cases, quotas become essential when, through reasoning and logic and time and patience and persuasion, when they don't work, you have to introduce quotas. So perhaps that's the solution for India as well, and I'm hoping we'll get to the 33% very soon. But to come back to foreign policy, as I said, the number of women diplomats in India has grown considerably to where we're now taking in 30 to 40%. What are the challenges these young women will face? I see the main challenge is that you have to be very tech savvy these days. You have to be able to really push your trade and economic ties. You have to be able to essentially engage with politicians on their own level. We do have a great advantage as women diplomats and as Indian diplomats on the whole, that we tend to develop a very close relationship with the political leadership. And perhaps as women, what we can do is to convince them that they have to give women a larger voice in the formulation of foreign policy, in the formulation of our foreign policy goals. And, ultimately, we can be as many diplomats as you like, but foreign policy, how shall I put it? There's a very good analogy used by one of our former foreign secretaries. This is that foreign diplomacy is the delivery system, and foreign policy is the missile, So you need to have a lot of diplomats to deliver the message. The foreign policy itself has to be formulated in a way that it becomes attractive. And I recently gave a talk, on the art and heart of diplomacy. And I'd like to share some of my findings from that with you, because I think that's appropriate on the International Day of Diplomacy. My generation was a fortunate one, and I looked at 5 main themes basically in the address that I gave on the art and heart of diplomacy. One was, of course, to outline the history of how the Indian Foreign Service was created. The second was my understanding of the various duties of a diplomat, with special references on the duties owed to the government of the day, the Constitution of India, and to the nation itself. The third theme is the leadership that diplomats need to develop and display at times of crises and at every level of their career. The fourth theme is the challenging relationship between diplomats and politicians. And the fifth and final theme, for which I seek your indulgence, was the various challenges I have faced in my career, which I've already described to you in some sense. And, I've had a long and very productive diplomatic career. I'm very proud of all I've achieved. And I can only say that this is a wonderful career. And one of the things that makes it wonderful is that right from the beginning, at least from the time I joined, we didn't join on a quota, which is why essentially I'm opposed to quotas. And because of that, we could hold our own. We could say, I did the same exam as you did. I came in on the same criteria. So please do not patronize me, which is one of the big problems in a patriarchal society such as ours. The second, I think, an important advantage was that as women, because we were in a minority, we were noticed. And while I would certainly not suggest that that's a good thing, but in a way, it makes you noticeable. It makes you more able to engage the attention of the decision makers. And I think that is not something to be sneezed at. But ultimately, it's not really gender equal. I mean, the real aim should be that we should have 50% of the women being represented as diplomats, and the foreign service should be made up that way. The second thing should be that we should be taken seriously, and that is something I've endeavored all my life to do, to be taken seriously as a professional, to be taken seriously as a woman diplomat, and to be taken seriously as a dedicated diplomat, because if you don't have that, then you cannot win the admiration and trust of those around you. You cannot be a good leader. You cannot head an embassy. And I was lucky in that I think I did succeed in those efforts. And I think in today's world, it's far harder for a woman diplomat to succeed, simply because we all know that the policies of the present government are not very women friendly, so for all the big talk about beti bachao, beti padhao, beti this and beti that, we all know that that's not happening, right? So ultimately, I think, as one of the previous speakers said, when you have a very right-wing outlook, it's very hard to have a liberal attitude towards women. And that is what is required, really. And I want to see women flourish in every area of foreign policy making, whether it's in the diplomatic world, whether it's in the journalism world, whether it's the whether it's in the, in any sphere really that affects foreign policy, I want women to be active, and definitely at the higher echelons of government, because that's where you get your real support, and that's where policies are made and actually made to be implemented. So with that, I think I'll conclude my remarks here, because if there are any questions, I'd be delighted to interact with all of you. And I think I've kept to my time schedule. It's probably a little ahead of schedule, but that'll be good because we'll have more time for interaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We really appreciated such a personal insight into foreign policy and feminist foreign policy. And once again, I would like to invite Professor Vibhuri Patel for her remarks.
Yeah, I join all the participants, hundreds of them, who found your talk very, very inspiring. I think many of them are also aspiring to get into like government job and also diplomacy. My question to you is that what is the pathway for women diplomats to get agenda setting power? Because what we see that the relationship of elected representatives and diplomats, is there any platform where they to come together and their voice is heard, because they know the reality, because they are placed at the ground level, they interact with the ground level? So that was, and is there an association of women diplomats, not at a global level because national security is a supreme concern, but at least at a national level to share experiences and mentoring young women diplomats to be more effective in their work?
Unfortunately, no, because I think a lot of women, as you know, do not want to be typified as women diplomats, and they shy away from this idea that they should be lumped with all the other women in one particular category and kind of unionize, if you like, to fight for more representation for women. But I would say there are a lot of informal networks within the Foreign Service. And many of us, for instance, I recall when I was a younger diplomat, Madhu Bhaduri, whom you probably know, who was also a very ardent feminist like myself, Madhu and I, and several others, Meera Shankar, who went on to become our ambassador in the US, we formed an organization called Karmika, where we advocated the rights of working women in India. And we said everybody works, all women work, We also joined and actually actively participated in the push to get the rape bill through, where we argued that marital rape was not acceptable and so on and so forth. And so in that sense, yes, these informal networks have existed and I think will continue to exist. And I myself count women diplomats among my closest friends. And we have a particular kind of empathy for each other, understanding for each other. But in terms of formal organization, no, unfortunately. And, because I think it would then make us somehow respected less in a way. Perhaps that's the one feeling of some of the women. And we want to be judged on our own merits as equal partners. Yeah. Sorry, I can't hear you.
I did not mean trade union. I meant just an association or a professional body.
No, unfortunately not. But I've seen that in Delhi, for example, I was often asked to come and meet the association of, they had women diplomats or women ambassadors groups. So I would go and interact with them and talk to them and so on and so forth. But having an actual association, I think a lot of women would shy away from that.
Good, I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a couple maybe more personal questions, I think, in light of what you were talking about. There's a lot of people very interested to know how you sort of ended up in the position that you did, how you chose to become an ambassador, what inspired you as a young woman to be part of the Indian Foreign Services. And a secondary one on, we've sort of spoken about how sometimes your feminist values can sort of be in conflict with your work. In countries like India, of course, that also translates to your home. So there's a couple questions about how women are able to balance their roles at home and their roles at work, and if that's a fair expectation in the first place.
Well, let me start with the, tell me again what the first one was.
Just more about your personal journey, how
Okay,
you
my
chose the
personal
Indian Foreign
journey,
Services.
yeah. Let me talk about that first, and then I can get back to the other one. The personal journey, actually mine was a very strange case, you know. I was not a person who ever dreamt of joining the Foreign Service or in fact joining the government at all. You know, I actually wanted to originally become a professor of literature, English literature, which was my subject. And the alternative was to join the corporate sector. And my third alternative, it was really never in my mind. And my father was in the Indian Administrative Service, and he was, of course, very keen that one of his children follow in his footsteps. But I was never very attracted by government service because I had seen it firsthand how difficult life was in the IAS for him and so on. And but when I took a year off to start applying for my MBA in different institutions and the PhD, I was preparing for my PhD as well. My father said, "Why don't you also take the UPSC exams? Because you know, there's no harm." And I said, "But I don't like the IAS." He said, "That's fine. I don't think the IAS would like you either." So he said, "Why you choose the Foreign Service? I think that's a better choice for you because you love travel. I had already traveled abroad, and I spoke different languages and so on. So he said you would be happier in the Foreign Service." And he actually was quite enamored by the Foreign Service because he had done a stint in London at the High Commission as the Trade Commissioner for many years. And he really loved it. So he was quite, you know, he said, "I'm quite happy if you want to join the Foreign Service." So I gave only the Foreign Service as my choice. And then I just prepared for the exams. I didn't go to a coaching school or anything. I just prepared at home and studied. And I chose literature, of course, which was my subject, and I chose history. And lo and behold, to my utter amazement, I actually got through the written exams. And then they said, "Come for the interview." And the interview was on my birthday. So, of course, I kicked and screamed and said, "I don't want to go. I want to celebrate my birthday," and so on and so forth. But I was forced to go for the interview. And I went to the interview. And at the interview, I personally didn't think I'd done very well, but I was obviously so nonchalant about the whole thing that something must have impressed the interviewers. So they said, to my horror, I found at the end of it all that I had actually been admitted into the Foreign Service. Well, I can't say horror, but it was definitely one of the choices. So there were three choices. I had got a fully paid scholarship to the US to do my PhD with the advisor I wanted. I had gotten to all the MBAs I'd applied for, which was Bangalore, Ahmedabad, Calcutta, etc., etc. And then and the Bajaj School of Management in Bombay. And then I had also gotten to the Foreign Service. So I had to make a choice. So it was literally a question of chance, you know, that it was eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you know, and I just picked the Foreign Service because, as somebody pointed out to me, my brother actually, he said, "You can always do the MBA exam again. You can always do the PhD again, but you can't take the Foreign Service exam again because if you've got your first choice, on what basis can you do the exam again? You're not allowed to." you know. And he says, he told me that he was in university at the time. He said, I know a lot of people and they've all told me that this is actually a very good deal and you should just try it so of course for the first year I was a square peg in a round hole and kept kicking and screaming and threatening to resign every time things didn't go my way. And then slowly, I don't know how it became sometime in the next few years, it became a perfect fit and I was very happy in my round hole,
So the answer is
that's the personal journey, And
be
the
brilliant.
second one?
More about sort of balancing as women in India, balancing their personal lives and their professional lives, especially in this.
Yeah. See, I think that one thing is for sure, that no woman should try to be superwoman. That is the big failing that a lot of women fall into, that they want to be the best in their career and the best at home. It's not possible. It's just not possible because there's not enough hours in the day. So what do? So you delegate, right? So firstly, I must say that I've remained single all my life, so I've not had to face some of the very tough choices some of the other women have had to face, who've had, but there are a lot of women in the Indian Foreign Service who are happily married with children and where they've got very supportive spouses, and the marriages by and large have worked beautifully. And for the first 25 years, what helps is that in the Indian Foreign Service, they do make an effort to post the husband and wife together, and a genuine effort. So either you get sent to larger embassies where there are 2 posts where both of you can work at the same level, and or you can spend a lot of time at headquarters because they always need officers at headquarters, where again, there's plenty of jobs in headquarters for both people. And then it's only after, I would say, 25 years when both of you get to this stage of being ambassadors, that the real difficult question come of should we follow our separate paths and so on. And frankly, by then, I think the marriage is strong enough, that it lasts and there isn't a problem. So that's one part of it. The second thing, as I said, was the delegation. You have to understand that at work also, you have to delegate well to your deputies, and so that you can give some attention to the home. At home as well, you have to engage very experienced staff. You have to be willing to spend so that you can then rest assured that your house is running smoothly and that things are doing well. When you have children, that's a third question. How are you going to balance that? And there I would say, you would have to have a supportive spouse. Family is very important because very often family steps in when, when both you and your spouse are under tremendous pressure. A mother or a mother-in-law or a sister, somebody will come and take over the burden of childcare for you. But yes, and certainly as part of a couple, as part of a family, particularly if you have children, I think you do have to, at times, to make some compromises. But I think that's okay because frankly, people do understand and they don't punish you for it or penalize you in any way. So I would say it's possible to achieve a good work-life balance and, to do everything you have to do both professionally and personally, but you have to employ the tools that are available. So that's my take on it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
we really appreciate your personal touch and the time that you've taken to come and talk to us. And I appreciate that your answer to our questions is first, be brilliant. First, be brilliant. Thank you so much. We hope to continue to see you here at IMPRI, and we really appreciate your input and once again, your patience. We know we're running a little bit or a lot ahead of schedule. Thank you so much for your time.
Not at all. It was a great pleasure talking to all of you.
Okay. I would then like to invite our chair for the day's final remarks before we go into a vote of thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Now we come to the end of this program. First of all, we have to really express our heartfelt thanks to Stephenie Foster, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, and Ambassador Latha Reddy for such a erudite and excellent, eloquently they spoke on feminist foreign policy. What emerged from their presentations is that feminist foreign policy offers a framework to pose uncomfortable questions, to raise challenges, to promote or alternative discourses, and also include marginalized different subaltern voices, diversity they emphasize, and also ultimate goal of redressing inequalities, inequities, and unbalances in the world, and also the crisis management. The insights of feminist theoretical perspectives which were put forward by both Professor Stephenie Foster and Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya from the international relations discourses and the political science theoretical understandings which we have gained over last right from the time of Aristotle and Socrates till now, that it offers important insights into necessity of humanitarian and gender responsive approach to security during conflict resolution and also peace building processes, as two examples were given by Honorable Ambassador Latha Reddy. And in the post-pandemic world, there has been an increasing acceptance of critical urgency for development and implementation of socio-political reforms to ensure equality, inclusion, social justice, and that it was very vociferously put forward by representatives and women leaders of 65 countries who met both in Paris and Mexico simultaneously. So genuine achievement of global peace cannot coexist with any kind of ongoing human suffering. That is the understanding, that is the matrix within which feminist foreign policy discourses are happening. It was in 1990, it was unthinkable that women, peace and security agenda would ever become part of UN Security Council, and the whole trajectory which Professor Foster put forward in front of us right from 1948 till the date, and the resolution of 1325 which broke the barrier, and there have been advances in WPS agenda, women, peace and security agenda, in the subsequent resolutions, and which she also told us about the series of 9 resolutions that we had. So I think most important lesson and the learnings that we have, and it has also generated tremendous curiosity, healthy curiosity and intellectual curiosity among the participants who are also demanding the kind of questions, getting 88 questions in one panel discussion, or getting so many comments and the request for links and PDF. I think this is the sign of grand success of today's panel discussion, and all 3 panelists were really extraordinarily erudite, eloquent, bold, and also forthright in their presentation. And that's what we want, because we all have honesty of purpose in our mind when we talk about feminist foreign policy. Maybe the forces may be adverse for us, but at least we are making attempts with our complete commitment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So as we come to the end of day 1 of the Feminist Foreign Policy Past, Present, and Future through the Immersive Online Symposium, I, Varushka Bhushan, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose a formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI and the Asia Foundation. We are grateful to our experts for the day 1 session, Ms. Stephenie Foster, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, and Ambassador Latha Reddy, for taking out their valuable time and allowing us to learn from this program. I thank our chair for convening all the sessions, and I thank our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. And I thank everyone on this call for their deep patience with us. We look forward to welcoming you tomorrow on June 25th for day 2 of this course. And we are grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on podcasts or reading our publications. We hope to continue to join We hope to continue to see you at IMPRI and wishing you a good day, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Varushka, for moderating it so well. Thank you.